You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Immortal! Yes, the mighty Immortal. One of the best black metal bands to ever grace the planet. And we are discussing their discography today. Looking forward to this episode for black metal, the second wave of black metal. It's usually the Norwegian camp that gets the most attention. Granted, for a great reason, because they pretty much innovated the tremolo kind of style of black metal riffing and took that to cranked the dial to 11, and just a lot of innovation and a lot of wonderful spirit that went into the music in the early days of Norwegian black metal. And the trinity that I personally have, and your trinity may be different, but my favorite three Norwegian black metal bands are Immortal, Emperor, and Burzum. And so it's great today that Shelly had brought up, just let's do a deep dive into Immortal. And I can't ever say no to that. We do have a full house today. So we do have Shelly, of course, from Hate Meditations and Metal Legion magazine. Thank you, Shelly.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing another Focus episode.
Yes, sir. And also we have the Tyler. Always great that he's a regular on here now, part of the Necropolis crew, and he's the family. And I know for certain that he believes in tragedies. He believes in tragedies. So Tyler, thank you very much for joining today to talk about one of your favorite bands.
No problem. I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah, Immortal is excellent. Looking forward to talking about him.
I'm not trying to embarrass you, Tyler. I know you wrote the article back when you were a kid and teenager and all that. So we do have a special guest today.
It's cute. It's all good.
We do have a special guest today. It's a great friend of mine. Many beers have been consumed in his presence. I could go at length about back in my wilder days, in the bars and playing shows and all the women I went through back then. He was kind of my wingman sometimes. It was like, yeah, Jason, go for it. And we do have the Metal Jaime, a wonderful voice from San Antonio, Texas. Great aspect of the scene there. And I can't say enough good things about this man. He is a brother from another mother, and a lot of great experiences and conversations, and just all around great guy, a great friend of mine. So Jaime, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Jason, for having me on the show again. It's great to be here, and love to have this conversation about Immortal with you guys.
Yeah, I know Aaron just passed away, and you had known him for 30 years, and it hit you really hard. I'm like, why don't you come on the podcast, just take your mind off of the horrible aspects of reality and talk about the horrible aspects of music, the evil kind of horrible, not the just bad music or anything. But anyway, I apologize if you're listening today and you weren't pleased by my introduction. I am too sober. I did crack open a beer, so hopefully I do rev up a little bit, loosen up, and throw in some controversial takes. So first up, we're going to go through this in chronological order. So actually, the Immortal had a demo out, and it was really death metal, and we don't have to talk about that, but they're in Norway, and the black metal vibe was going on, and the spirit, they captured the spirit and decided to change their sound from death metal to black metal. Their first album, Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. Has a wonderful music video to it where there's prancing around in the woods making evil gestures. It's really cartoonish, and I think they've kind of kept that aspect to their public persona, being like jokesters and all that. But the music itself is very serious, and that's why they've withstood the test of time. To quote one of their song titles. The great music that's being presented on their debut album. Obviously, the Bathory influence is there 100%, but also they're exploring and different types of expressions. This is also very feral too. Sometimes the riffs go off and it's just add these extra little flourishes. Like, what the hell's going on there? Like, why would they think of that? And but all around, it's a great album. Me personally, I like the ones that came after this, Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. But for what it is if we had a tier list up, I would rate it a strong A plus around there. The DNA is in Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism of what Immortal would evolve into. So all the parts and pieces are there. They do cut out, later on the Bathory influence, but when it comes to like the early Norwegian bands, it's like Bathory being the main influence. It's very present here with Immortal's debut album. So Shelley, do you want to say anything about Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism?
Well, yeah, just to go back a step as well, because you mentioned obviously the first demo being much more of a death metal, and obviously Abat was in Old Funeral as well as a number of like the later kind of um, big names within Norwegian black metal were, but they also had that kind of humorous aspect to them as well, compared to like a um, Thou Shalt Suffer, which was slightly more like on the serious side with the guys from Emperor and Ilshan in it. But yeah, and then they evolved into, as you mentioned, kind of like probably the most explicitly Bathory influenced artists from the early kind of second wave of black metal, whereas your Dark Throne kind of were far more derivative of Celtic Frost at the time. Um, Immortal took it in a very, very particular direction by sort of deploying these, what it would later become sort of like Blizzard metal, where they kind of want to create this completely kind of lawless cacophony of noise, but then whenever they seem to completely lose control, they'll pull it back into something a slightly more like focused. But as you say, for me, they weren't one of these bands that kind of came out with the debut like fully formed. I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the Immortal debut in terms of like fashioning their sound. I don't think they quite found their identity yet. There's a lot to recommend it. It's incredibly atmospheric at times, as well as being very riff driven compared to some of the other bands that were sort of going in a more ambient direction. And you also get these random like random moments that kind of remind me of stuff like early Graveland and things where, for instance, on Unholy Forces of Evil, you'll just get these random blasts of like timpani drums and stuff. And they'd soon cut that out and become much more like direct guitar based band. But I quite like the fact that there's these interludes of like very ethereal acoustic guitars and things leading into these very, very, as you mentioned, like feral blasts of noise. And yeah, the humor's there as well. The video is infamous, but it kind of that's almost like a sideshow for me as far as like enjoying this album is concerned. But for me, it will always be a prelude to the album that followed. But I'm going to hand to Tyler now because I think he probably begs to differ as far as this album is concerned. So Tyler, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to be the odd man out here for sure, and that Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism is my personal favorite Immortal album. I also love Pure Holocaust and Blizzard Beasts Battles in the North, not so much, but we can get to that later. But anyhow, I do agree that it is the most Bathory influenced Immortal album. I would almost say that Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism is like the furthest development of the style that Bathory was doing on their better records. Perhaps a lot like Blood, Fire, Death in some ways. You can hear some similarities to riffing that Immortal was doing on the first album to riffs like in the first track after the introduction on Blood, Fire, Death, A Fine Day to Die. Um, but I really enjoy the somewhat uh, random, I shouldn't say random, but somewhat chaotic uh, and less planned atmosphere of the album. And I also really enjoy the contrast between the sort of controlled chaos portions and I guess what you could call the epic moments that have the more kind of straightforward black metal single motif, like melodic riffs that have a kind of more emotive, almost melancholic style of melody. Um, so I started out with listening to Immortal, with Pure Holocaust being the album that I listened to the most, but over the years I really gravitated to this album. There's a lot of really powerful moments, like the climax to A Perfect Vision of the Rising Northland, and really uh, that song in the context of the entire album almost makes the entire thing a kind of narration of sorts. Um, so yeah, for the sake of not going on too much at length, I'll just leave it with, yeah, this album is one of my absolute favorites as far as having that kind of atmosphere of mystery and almost amateurish in a good way darkness of the very early days of black metal, kind of for similar reasons that I prefer the earlier Graveland albums, to hearken to Shelley's comparison.
Yeah, I agree with the analogy that Shelley made to Graveland. That's very apt. Like, I would verge and say some parts do seem random and not necessarily, just like them, just like let's be chaotic. In some parts it does seem a little unfocused, but in those random parts. But as a whole, it's a great experience. And as you said, like perhaps it may be the most evolved form of the Bathory, the early Bathory expression. Um, but yeah, Metal Jaime. Do you have any thoughts on Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism by Immortal?
Yeah, it's a great, solid debut album by Immortal. Again, similar to Dark Throne in the aspect that they had more of a death metal sound originally, and then got influenced by Euronymous to go more the black metal route. What what I noticed was a couple of things that nobody mentioned here is Abbott's vocals on this album are way different than future albums. This was, I guess, before he really started settling into the whole Popeye on helium type of vocal. So, but on the bright side, it did bring, hide and go seek in the forest into the map of music videos, as seen by the Call of Winter Moon video. The general Bathory esque type of vibe, it's definitely there. I fondly remember listening to this album for the first time after a Thorn Spawn practice that we had, and I think it was either Alex or Carl. One of them just happened to have it on the CD player, and this was my first time listening to it. Coming back to when I had originally first started listening to Immortal, it was mostly Battles in the North and Pure Holocaust. And being a broke college student at the time, I didn't really have much money to be able to buy anything else, so I really relied on a lot of people to give me either mixtapes or let me borrow a tape or a CD to check it out. And yeah, it was a huge change compared to future albums on musically and vocally in that aspect. But overall, a very, very good, solid debut album for Immortal.
Yeah, it's not quite as dramatic as the leap that say Dark Throne made, like hopping genres, but it is definitely like they. I think you're right to point out the vocals because that is kind of indicative of they were a very very different band at this point. And as Tyler mentioned as well, the closing track, A Perfect Vision of the Rising Northland, is like it's not quite anticipating tracks like Mountains of Might. I think this one is much more like gloomy and ethereal and kind of malevolent in a way that the later epic style that particularly Abbott era Immortal would kind of go down as much brighter and heavy metal influenced. And I kind of think that is one of the kind of missing pieces of the Immortal evolution because they would kind of dispense with that for the next set of albums and go much more kind of direct and blunt in their expression, which is obviously it generated basically their classic era. But it is there are lots of interesting like little crevices and corners of this album that often go overlooked by people for the sake of like the albums that followed. And I'm just as guilty of that as anyone, to be honest.
All right, so that's kind of interesting that we have a divergent opinions on Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. It happens to be Tyler's favorite, but sometimes Tyler, like, I think he's just his own type of guy, and he's into things like that other people, say, "Oh yeah, that's cool," but Tyler like just delves into it, and I can see like he may like the more primitive aspects of extreme metal, like the early on, like influential stuff. Then myself or Shelly, who was like, "Oh, okay, well, this is where the band, they refined their expression a little bit." I think Tyler is really into that raw, early expression. Like Tyler, just a quick question. I'm not throwing you under a bus or anything. I'm saying this with endearment because it's great that you do have a divergent opinion sometimes. For Morbid Angel, we might have gotten into this if you were on the Morbid Angel episode. I forget. It's been a long time, but do you prefer abominations or altars, Tyler? Just to kind of pinpoint where your logic is.
That's a really difficult question because I listen to Altars quite a bit, but I do have a massive appreciation for Abominations and listen to it about just as much. And I guess, kind of in line with what you're saying, there are some aspects of Abominations that I like more than Altars. Altars kind of gets a little bit more of that kind of streamlined industrial sound, especially percussively. I've described it before as like a tank steamrolling a mall, and that is cool in its own right. But there's a kind of organic evil to Abominations that I feel is slightly lost on Altars. So yeah, I think that your description there of my taste is pretty apt.
I wouldn't just say it's a taste thing. I would say you're one of the most focused listeners that I know in that you like, for instance, take Morbid Visions, which we've mentioned many times as an album that you listen to quite often. I absolutely love the album, but it sometimes it does wash over me. Whereas I think Tyler tends to really, really hone in on the kind of little like micro changes and adjustments that the average listener might just let them pass by. And I can do that kind of listening when I really put my mind to it. But day to day, it's not something that, I take more of a bird's eye view, I think, at times.
I'm curious to see what Tyler's view is on Celtic Frost's Cold Lake album is.
Are you really? Are you really curious about that?
Yeah, I'm curious because based on what you're saying about these albums, I'm curious. Okay, what's the Pepsi challenge here on the Cold Lake view?
If I'm gonna give my most honest, objective opinion, and I'll keep it short because we're talking about Immortal, Cold Lake is not a great album, but it probably is criticized more than it deserves to be, and that might be only a slight more, but I think that it's not as bad as it's made out to be sometimes in like popular metal media where they just talk about it as an absolute sellout with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. But clearly for me, it's a step down from something like my most listened to Celtic Frost album, which is Morbid Tales by far.
Ah, see, there again.
So say
Like I would have said to Megatherium.
Morbid Tales, Morbid Visions, Morbid Angel.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I tend to agree. It's more the vocals are the worst thing about it. Some of the riffs aren't that bad.
Okay, all right. So sorry for the off-roading there that we just did, but I do have some Reisdorf, my favorite German beer, and doing a pure Holocaust on my liver. Yes, it does a pure Holocaust on my liver. Speaking of a pure Holocaust, that is
Seamless.
Immortal's next.
Seamless.
That wasn't forced or anything. So a lot of people talk about Pure Holocaust being their favorite album. I know Daniel from Gord, Jaime, he loves Pure Holocaust, and he did some covers of it. And back in the day, I don't think he recorded it. I think he did record it actually. Yeah, he did. with a drum machine. But this is the album where Immortal shed their Bathory influence that was so prominent on Full Moon Diabolical Mysticism or Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. Um, and it's straight up fucking. This is like the most like harsh expression of the second wave of black metal, in my opinion. It is just blasting and blitzing through. Um, on Silent Storms and North Abyss, opening with that track, and so many iconic lines and great riffs. I know The Sun No Longer Rises is one of Tyler's favorites because of the article he wrote. But this is where Immortal definitely shed their Bathory influence, went more for the tremolo style of riffing, and the production is fucking absolute shit on it, but it's wonderful. Like the Immortal albums we're getting into now, the production veers on horrible, but the music just stands so firmly and so well put together. Um, and it's one of these albums that I can turn it on and just definitely just really get into it. Um, Now we're getting into like the Trinity. I know Tyler has a different opinion, but the Trinity of Immortal albums. So Shelley, what are your kind of thoughts on Pure Holocaust? This is they're continuing having their own faces and their bodies on the albums, which I think that comes from Kiss, right? Like Kiss did that, um, and that's kind of granting the meme of Immortal. So, what are your kind of thoughts on Pure Holocaust, Shelley?
Yeah, well, I'm in this camp. To be honest, as like hands down one of my favorite Immortal albums and one of my favorite Norwegian black metal albums. I think in many ways I often find myself comparing it to Deicide's Legion as like the black metal rebuttal to that album for just how brief and dense it is, but how much information it packs within it. Like I was listening to it recently for the first time in some years, and you just forget how efficient the album is for just how much they managed to convey within a very brief space of time, and also with very kind of, as you mentioned, the production is pretty rough going. Um, so it's there's no flashes to it, but they managed to achieve a degree of sophistication that is quite rare within black metal of this kind. And I kind of again another comparison I would draw is probably with something like Gorgoroth's Pentagram, for being very, very blasting, energetic, exhilarating, but also an underlying sophistication to it. There is a sophistication to the way that Jimenez constructs riffs that literally sounded like no one else at the time. And I kind of also like the fact that at this point we talk about the Holy Trinity, but I'll include Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism in this as well. Is at this time no two Immortal albums were sounding the same, whereas you couldn't necessarily say the same about any of their peers. And that's not to say that they were superior or inferior in any way. Obviously, I speak very highly of Burzum and Darkthrone and Emperor a lot of the time, but at some point they had kind of normalized their approach and their aesthetic, whereas Immortal was still kind of veering from one direction to the other with not just how they, how the albums were produced and mixed and mastered, but how they presented the music as well. And this is sort of what I'd call like high Immortal in that it's them at their most sophisticated, but they're most efficient and creative, and it's an exhilarating experience to listen to just what's going on, and it has its charm as well because you just hear Abbott's drumming desperately trying to keep up with what's going on, and his vocals are sometimes way too loud, and they have those lines that are almost comical at times, but it never degenerates, it never kind of takes away from the overall experience. So yeah, it's a very special album for me. So yeah, absolutely one of my favorites. So yeah, I can't really say praise it highly enough, to be honest.
Also, the just the riff craft is a lot more technical. It is like that, tremolo style black metal riffing, but it's so fast, and Demoness is playing like three strings a lot on those chords and just playing super quick. The technical proficiency is much more refined than it was on the debut
Well,
album.
for me,
Tyler,
sorry, I will hand over to Tyler in a second, but I'll just very quickly say I get a lot of shit for talking shit about Mayhem, and this is not to do that again, but I'm going to slightly do that again. In that, for me, Demon has like achieved what Euronymous, developed and innovated. I fully accept that, but he kind of, I think Demon has did it better, and this album it's just a way more efficient version of Mayhem's the following year. I know most of the Mayhem material is already written, but it just, I think just this does it slightly better. And there's nothing wrong with saying Euronymous might have innovated it, but other people kind of carried it forward a bit further. And yeah, that's just another reason why it's so special for me. So I've just dropped that
Well,
that bit
well, Demoness was also a better musician, technically speaking,
technically
than
speaking, yeah.
your.
Sorry, I thought I'd just drop that provocation in before handing off to Tyler.
But yeah, like if you wanted to do an Immortal cover, you have to be really proficient at guitar, especially in this era of Immortal. Tyler, what are your thoughts on Pure Holocaust?
Pure Holocaust is a fascinating album. There are so many interesting things that it was doing as far as developing the black metal genre that I honestly feel were never really properly followed up on, as influential as Immortal was. I mean, the approach to percussion on that album, where it just kind of becomes a racing stream of blasting and furious, fast paced drumming that almost kind of nullifies the presence of the drums in the equation to give the guitars kind of just a chaotic wash of noise to flow over and change over. It's absolutely astounding that they managed to do that, whether intentionally or not, I'm not sure. And then even talking about the production, which in the most technical uh, terms of things is awful, but they actually utilize it once again, perhaps unintentionally, in a way that contributes to the overall kind of wave of sound that you're hearing from the distortion, where there's almost a presence of harmonies that develop upon the melody that maybe aren't actually there. Um, and that kind of adds to the sense of mysticism and obscurantism in the album. So yeah, and then the approach to riff writing in general, just the kind of extreme focus, almost hyper focus on having a flow of melody that shifts and weaves throughout the course of the songs. By all means, it is an excellent album. Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism might be my favorite, but that's not to place this one on a lower echelon in the least. This is an excellent black metal album, one of the best. And Shelley, your statement wasn't provoking to me at all. If someone were to ask me point blank, I would, without hesitation, say, "Oh yeah, Immortal, as a band, on their quality material, and especially on this album, is far better than Mayhem." Even though I do appreciate Mayhem's debut album.
I do too. Like, I had gone a long time without listening to Mayhem, and like a year ago, I put on De Mysteriis Dom Sathanas, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually fucking good," especially compared to a lot of new metal being released nowadays. But it was fucking solid as shit. Like, yes, Immortal has a better like second wave of black metal expression. It's more realized, especially on this album, Pure Holocaust. But there's some really quirky aspects to Immortal that I love a lot, and that comes out in this album too. Just really from left field type of riffing that you wouldn't really expect it nowadays. You wouldn't expect it at all coming from a band. Like the closest like to Immortal is perhaps like Hate Forest, but they come nowhere near like as great and realized. They just kind of capture the vibe here and there rather than like the Rome or whatever his name is isn't a as proficient on guitar as the Demonos. So Jaime, Metal Jaime, what are your thoughts about Pure Holocaust? I know this is definitely your foray of black metal.
Yeah, hands down, my favorite Immortal album. This was a very unique album. Just going back to the discussion about the drums, the first thing you notice is the kick drums are a lot louder than a lot of the instruments, especially in the song Frozen by Ice Winds. It's one of my favorite songs. The intro, just it's like a bulldozer just knocking down a building. This album with the drums, you can tell there's a huge difference than on Diabolical Full Mysticism, simply for the fact that Armageddon is no longer the drummer, and I believe Abbott took the reins for the drums on this album. Even though on the cover you see Eric Grimm, he unfortunately did not have any playtime on this album when it was recorded. But again, one of the better albums that the Immortal has cranked out. Again, my favorite in my opinion, with a close second being Battles in the North. That could be debated, to the cows come home. But overall, Pure Holocaust. If I had to recommend to somebody that's never heard Immortal, Pure Holocaust would be the album I would tell them to listen to. Hands down, just a great album.
Yeah, I
You
think
see, oh, go ahead,
I
Shelly.
was just gonna say I think on this album and Battles in the North, Abbott's drums was sped up because he could not play at the speed required to keep up with Demonizer's riffing. Don't quote
That
me on that, but
that is correct.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could kind of hear that on a lot of the blasting, not so much because that's locked in. But when he tries a fill, and it's just completely bungled, it's funny. It kind of makes it such a weird album as well as being such a great album. But yeah, it's just one of those quirks that you would not get on a modern album. But I absolutely love it for that.
And
So,
the little hints of like the wind blowing in the background in between songs and stuff, just the little aspects that they add in there just to add the detail.
yeah, just to kind of carry on what Jaime was saying about like he would recommend this one, Pure Holocaust, before any other Immortal album to someone interested in black metal. I would have a different take. Like I would consider what that person is into. Like if they're more into death metal, I'd recommend Blizzard Beast, or if they're into like dipshit Vulcan piece of thrash, I would recommend Sons of Northern Darkness. So it really depends on the person and what they might get out of Immortal with the
Do
different
you like death
eras.
metal or dipshit pizza fresh?
All right, so next up is Battles in the North. Tyler may have a divergent view on this album, but I fucking love it. I've listened to this one and Blizzard Beast the most, especially in my later years. And one of my favorite Immortal songs on this album is one that they did a couple of music videos. So they did Grim and Frostbitten Kingdoms and Blashrick. I've never known how to pronounce it. I think I
Blashir.
pronounced it somewhat correctly.
Blashir, mate.
Blashir. Yeah, that one on. They did a couple cheesy music videos for Battles in the North, and but my favorite song off this album is the one before the closing track, "Circling Above" and "Time Before Time," and silly Immortal lyrics and titles and all that. But there's some great fucking chord progressions in the song that it's one of my favorite songs in black metal. Period. And it might be an unpopular opinion because it's like, well, it's really basic. They kind of they cycle through the riffs. They play the same riff progression twice and all that. But the riffs are so fucking good that I can listen to it on repeat. And this is one of those albums where a friend of mine, Carl, who's in Japan, he brought it up to my attention that it's true the statement that he made that like all four early Immortal albums have a little bit of death metal DNA, and this is where that DNA gets more expressed, that death metal DNA. And so it's not black and death metal or anything like that. It's straight up black metal, but there is like an order to it, like a death metal order or Apollo, as Shelley would say. And it's filled with so much musical content, like a death metal band does. And there are some riffs here and there that sound like death metal riffs. But this is where it comes more pronounced in the death metal realm. It's still straight up black metal, but like we're talking about, like who would you recommend an Immortal album to? If they're into death metal, I would recommend first Blizzard Beast, second Battles in the North. Great album. The production is completely fucking horrible on it. It is a fucking pain on the eardrums, but the riffs are so great. The contrast between riffs and all of that is so wonderful that it's a timeless classic. It's a S tier if we were going to rank it today. It's one of my favorite Immortal albums and black metal albums. Period. Shelley, what are your kind of thoughts on Battles in the North?
So yeah, we talked about like what Immortal album you'd recommend to someone. So I was getting into Immortal very early in my like listening days of black metal. I was not used to the lo-fi production and just how abrasive it was. And I absolutely love Pure Holocaust because it does have an element of elegance to it, and you can kind of it does layers of complexity to it, but you can kind of understand what's going on at a very basic level, even if your ears are not that refined. Battles in the North is not that. It is for someone that's never heard much black metal before. It is a cacophony of noise. Re-listening to it now, some 20, 24 years later, um, there is actually a lot of melody going on. There's a lot of subtlety to it. It's much more direct than Pure Holocaust. Don't get me wrong. Like they definitely blunted the edges, but the riffs themselves, some of them are almost lyrical in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think you're right to draw the death metal comparison as being more explicit here because some of them uh, they don't toy with the language of like melodic death metal, but they kind of because they're still talking in the harmonic language of black metal and applying it to a more death metal setting. There is kind of a little bit of a crossover there, but it's kind of buried within this cacophony of what was becoming known as like blizzard metal at the time. And yeah, it's one of these albums that's interesting for the fact that probably a lot of it was unintentional. And what I love about Immortal of this era is despite the fact that they were clearly accomplished musicians more so than many of their peers, they weren't in control of what was going on in the recording of these albums. Like the levels are way off, the guitar tone is not fit for purpose, the vocals are far too loud, and they're playing faster than they could stay in control of. But for that reason, I love it. There's like this is at a time when albums, there was still possibility, there was still room for spontaneity. It wasn't sterile or curated in any way, and the artists themselves didn't really know what was going on. But out of it, you get these wonderful like statements. And yeah, sometimes it's comical, but other times it's totally profound. And I do agree with you on Circling Above in a Time Before Time. I think that's a fantastic track. I've also always loved Curse Realm of the Winter Demons as well, for its kind of meshing of like atonal brutality and then quite like elegant, almost pretty melodies at times. So yeah, in a lot of ways, this is kind of like Pure Holocaust's ugly sister. I don't return to it quite as often because it is, as you mentioned, a very abrasive listen. But yeah, absolutely essential as far as like the canonized works of black metal are concerned. So yeah, totally agree with that.
Tyler, ready for you to shit on everything Shelley just said.
Oh man, that's a lot of pressure. So yeah, what Battles in the North is not a bad album like some later albums in the Immortal discography. It's just one that I can't find myself fully latching onto the way I do the two albums preceding it and the one album after it. Uh, I guess that what one of the things that I don't like about it is the pizza thrash riffs. No,
Ooh.
I'm kidding. um, uh, I mean, there is a little bit of an element of kind of more like speed metal approach to rhythm in it. Maybe that's what Jason is talking about when he talks about there being a more death metal approach to riff craft on this album. Honestly, I've listened to it a decent number of times, including for preparation to this episode, and I have difficulty remembering it from time to time. It doesn't have some of those almost transcendent moments that I hear on Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism or Pure Holocaust. It's very abrasive. It's not bad. It's not badly put together, and it doesn't rely on any especially cheap quirks or cute approaches to aesthetics the way that Immortal would do later on, but it just doesn't do it for me. I don't want to go into too much detail so we can move on, but that's about the summation of it for me. It just doesn't do it for me.
Well, Tyler, I brought up Blizzard Beast because I'm controlling this episode today, and I'm looking at the albums, and on Blizzard Beast, there's a lot more memorable songs for me personally. I do like some of the songs greatly off of Battles in the North, but I think Blizzard Beast may be my favorite all time Immortal. Just having this discussion today and realizing going through the albums, it's I know the lyrics off this album more than any other Immortal album. So let's move on to Blizzard Beast.
Well, no, Jaime hasn't spoken on it yet. On Battles in the North.
Oh, sorry, Jaime. What do you have to say about Battles in the North, Jaime? I apologize. I'm just ready. It's like I fucking love Blizzard Beast. I'm just wanting to jump into it. Jaime,
Nothing.
what are your general thoughts on Battles in the North?
Yeah, nothing like being blown off by Jason. All right, I appreciate that. I have really fond
I've
memories
never
of this.
blown you off, Jaime. Don't say that. I've never blown you off.
I have a lot of fond memories of this album. This was one of the first. This was my first Immortal album that I bought on CD, and I still remember this to this day. Going to Hog Wild Records, buying that Emperor's in the Nights of the Eclipse, and also Marduk's Heaven Shall Burn. So 1996, when this album came out, I mean, they came out with a lot of bangers. There was, like I mentioned, Marduk. You had Satyricon also come out with their Nemesis Divina album, Sacramentum, Far Away from the Sun. So it was a very competitive year for black metal. For this album itself, I mean, it's relentless. That's all I can say. It's just in your face. It's 1,000 miles per hour. I loved it. That's what I loved about it. Again, the production issues, I mean, it's starting to become a recurring theme with Immortal. And again, you'll see it a lot in Blizzard Beasts. But overall, to me, yes, as Tyler had said, some of the songs they're not really as memorable, or you can't really differentiate a couple of the songs. I could see that aspect of it. Definitely the guitar playing, which later on led to the tendonitis for Demonaz. I mean, it was just frantic and like I said, 1,000 miles per hour. So overall, I really liked this album. It wasn't my favorite Immortal album by any stretch of the imagination, but it is, in my opinion, a good Immortal album that is just fun to jam out to when you're on the highway and just trying to, get the gas going and trying to get from point A to point B pretty quick.
Just to clarify, I believe this one was 95. But just on that point as well, I know we're sort of talking about the production, but it is one of the most notable things about this album. I kind of love the fact that it's their what is it, third album. When I first listened to it, I thought it was like early demos or something, because even compared to Pure Holocaust, it is so rough to listen to. And I guess a case could be made for it taking away from some of the risk to some extent, like the most lo-fi stuff that Iljan has done. But I kind of just love the fact that they didn't seem to care. They weren't sort of trying to develop into a more sophisticated, polished, well-oiled machine. They kind of, for some reason, got more and more feral as they progressed, at least under sort of Demonaz's stewardship anyway. And that's one of the things that I quite love about it, in a similar way that, Dark Throne sort of got more and more feral until, after Panzerfaust or whatever. It kind of just speaks to the fact that black metal at this time was not like hostile for the sake of being hostile, but it was also highly experimental. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are getting divided opinions on this album, because it is definitely not for everybody. But at the time they were like, well, let's go in this direction. Why don't we just not build directly on Pure Holocaust, but take some of those ideas, but then take it in a totally different direction, but something that is still recognizably Immortal. And that's kind of what I love, and something that I guess we can unpack with Blizzard Beast as well, because they kind of did that to an even greater extent with that album.
Yes, sir. I agree, and I just want to reiterate. I do apologize, Jaime, for skipping over you, because I looked at Blizzard Beast and I got excited, and it's usually the three of us chatting, not four of us, and it's just force of habit. I would never blow you off, not literally and not figuratively. So your dick remains safe from my mouth.
We got the joke. We didn't need to make it explicit.
Yeah, man.
Hey, E for effort, right?
But anyway, on the Blizzard Beast. So there's a lot of wonderful songs on this album. This might be my favorite Immortal album. There, of course, always love Nebular Raven's Winter, Mountains of Might. Of course, the song Blizzard Beast. There's so many good songs on this album. This is where they took it more into a death metal direction, and it was after they toured with Morbid Angel too. Like, obviously Demonaz. I would say the closest thing to Blizzard Beast, musically speaking, with how the riffs are constructed, is Altars of Madness. With how Trey and early Morbid Angel wrote his riffs being really off kilter and all that. I get the same feeling on Blizzard Beast that Demonaz did it. Great testament to Demonaz's abilities, because there's only one Trey Esgoth, and he came really close to capturing the Morbid Angel fire in a black metal format. And this album it's just so fucking wonderful. It's definitely S tier for me. Uh, Mountains of might be the most iconic song I've ever heard, because it's the lyrics, the riffs, and the keyboards. It flows so perfectly. It's a wonderful experience, and I do think it's a very profound album too. We talk about the profundity in metal being narrative and all that, and that is exemplified here in the Blizzard Beast. Really stupid album cover with their faces and all that on it, like the other albums, but the music is as serious as it gets. This is like if Morbid Angel was born later and was a black metal band rather than a death metal band. The same kind of riffs would come out. Just wonderful all around. Shelley, what are your thoughts about Blizzard Beasts?
Yeah, there's a great irony to this album in that they finally got a competent drummer, but the mix is so fucked that you can't really appreciate the performance, as it sort of underpins the riffing. I have a sort of slightly contentious opinion on this album in that I love the opening riff to Mountains of Might, and it's recapitulated a couple of times, I believe, throughout the track. But it's one of my least favorite tracks on this album. I One of the reasons I love this album, and I totally get the death metal kind of influence that you mentioned, Jason, but for me, it's kind of like Battles in the North developed through the language of death metal, and I love the fact that they continue that blasting kind of almost completely structureless sort of blizzard riffing. I keep using that word, but I can't think of a better word for it. That they developed on Battles in the North, but they work in a finer sense of like percussive weirdness. I think because they had a more competent drummer, and also yeah, they were sort of using the language of yeah, death metal like Morbid Angel. So they do kind of mesh that a bit, and I think Mountains of Might not only cuts that momentum out, but it anticipates kind of the epic heavy metal kind of direction that they would take later on. So in many ways, this is viewed as like a transitional album because it has elements of the old and elements of the new to it. But for me, one of the reasons I love Battles in the North so much is because it is totally relentless. And I know you end with the slow plodding kind of number on Flashy Mighty Raven Dark, but that's kind of,
You mean Blizzard Beasts?
no, I mean Battles in the North. In that, one of the reasons I love Battles in the North is it is completely relentless and it does not stop throughout until it reaches the final track. Whereas Blizzard Beasts, Mountains and Might sort of cuts the momentum out for me, and it kind of completely brings the album to a standstill. Like I said, there are elements of that track that I completely love, but for me, it signals the end of the era of the Immortal that I love, and I kind of wish, because this is a short fucking album as well, I kind of wish they'd developed that meshing of rhythmic and melodic sophistication with the totally feral lawlessness of what you had on Battles in the North. And I think that's the common theme throughout this era of Immortal for me is all of these ideas are fantastic and I constantly return to them, but they were all like tragically never fully developed again, obviously because Demon has developed tendonitis after this and Immortal took a different direction and so on. And not many bands kind of picked up the mantle as far as this era of Immortal are concerned in the same way that they did a Dark Throne or a Burzum or an Emperor and so on. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about this album. I absolutely love it and I return to it a lot, but it always seems a little bit bittersweet for me.
That's interesting. I thought you would be on board with me with Blizzard Beast being a great album. I mean, you probably did say it was a great album, but not as great as I hold it. Um, like I said, I view this as I view it as a death metal album. Okay, I want to make that clear. It's a death metal album to me. So when I hear like you say, like more heavy metal and thrash elements, it's kind of lends itself to the death metal side for me, I guess. Um, Tyler, what are your thoughts on Blizzard Beast?
You'll be happy to hear that this is my second favorite Immortal album. I actually listened to it more than I listened to Pure Holocaust, as much as I feel that Pure Holocaust is a great album. Um,
Well, I am happy to hear that, Tyler. It's great to have you on my side.
So, yeah, Blizzard Beast is excellent. Really think that it has a certain variety in approaches to songwriting that maybe are not quite as present on Battles in the North, and perhaps present in a different way on Pure Holocaust. In some ways, the approach to riff writing, although with a different kind of lens in terms of production and aesthetic, reminds me a little bit of Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. That might just be because Diabolical has some leftover death metal riffs from Immortal's pre black metal days. But yeah, I really enjoy this album. I think that it has a really awesome approach to contrasting a grinding, chaotic sense of rhythmic riffing with a soaring, powerful sense of melody. Um, it's been stated before, but in some ways, I think that it's a similar approach to what you would hear in some Dutch death and black metal bands like Sinister. And a point of comparison that's been drawn before also by others is Godless Arrogance by Samoth, I think, has a similar approach with some differences, obviously. Um, I guess to somewhat uh, kind of agree with Shelley, I do really love the song Mountains of Might. I like it on the album. I do see a lot of people who are fans of later Immortal talking about Mountains of Might being the sign of what's to come, and you can hear that in the track. It has a heavy metal approach to melodicism that even the melodic portions of other tracks on the album don't take, at least not as much. But overall, Blizzard Beast is fantastic. And kind of as Jason said earlier, depending on the person I'm talking to, it might be the Immortal album I would recommend if they hadn't heard Immortal before. Otherwise, I might recommend something along the lines of Pure Holocaust. Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism would be more so something I would recommend for someone who is weird and into obscure, morbid, raw stuff like I am, and those are kind of few and far between.
Yeah, Tyler, I think you're your own breed, and it's really great to have you on here because you do have a different perspective sometimes. Jaime, what are your thoughts on that Blizzard Beast?
So Blizzard Beast, this is I might be in the minority here. Opening up here, I do like the music. It's just the production and the mix really killed it for me. It sounded like it could have been so much better had they had they stayed at Holland Studios. I think maybe things would have turned out different. I fondly remember getting the this listening to the CD at KSYM my freshman year at college, and Tony from Tone Control.
Dude, I played at KSYM. I did a Good Craft set at KSYM on air.
Yeah, I heard they completely revamped the studio. I heard it's really nice. I haven't been there in, gosh,
Yeah, it was
26
it
years.
was on the third floor. They had like
Yeah,
like two DJ booths and a jammer, and that's where I plugged in the keyboard, played in there. Yep, it was a really nice facility, and they had this like
nice.
library of everything they recorded there, and hundreds of thousands of CDs just on this wall, and it was a really great experience. But go ahead on KSYM.
Yeah, my buddy Tony, he was the DJ there. He had the promo, and he's like, "Hey, check it out! It's the new Immortal." And of course, everybody was hyped up about the new Immortal. He pops it in, and sure enough, he plays Mountains of Might, and the music sounded great. But it's like I said, just the production and the mix just kind of it sounded really low. It sounded like the vocals were drowning out most of the music. It's kind of like it left a lot to be desired in my view. Not to say that it was a bad album. It's just kind of like Slayer's Divine Intervention. If they had had a better production, it could have been way better instead of kind of the hush hush type of album. But overall, like I said, I do like it. It's not a bad album, but it is the, I guess in my view, the twilight end of the OG era of Immortal, because again, Demonaz injured his arms, and then Abath pretty much kind of, I guess, mellowed out Immortal. I guess some people might argue with that, but in my view, Immortal just wasn't the same after that album.
I'm glad you raised the production because I have like a hot cold relationship with it. Sometimes I completely love it for being so outrageously quirky. Other times I do find it frustrating. But I think the frustrating thing is I mentioned earlier, like the albums where Abat is drumming, the drumming is sped up so that he can keep up. But it feels like they're doing the same thing here, despite the fact that Hawg is clearly capable of keeping up with this pace of riffing because he's a very competent drummer. And also his drum track is weak as fuck on here. And it does sort of feel like they were kind of using the same techniques, despite the fact that they kind of, they should have freshened it up a little bit by this point and thought, well, right, we've got a solid rhythm section now, we've got a really good foundation to build on. But I'm sort of saying that like it's a negative. It's also one of the things I love about the album is it at times, in similar ways to Battles in the North, it is a complete mess in a good way. Like it is completely lawless and like I said, it doesn't feel like they're in control of what's going on, which is part of the charm. But I can easily see how that would put someone off. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as like the introduction to Immortal. I think Pure Holocaust would be that for me because it is the most comprehensive kind of summation of what this era of Immortal are about. This album is patchy, not in terms of quality, but in terms of just how the styles that it kind of ranges through, that it is a little bit, for the uninitiated, is a little bit all over the place at times.
I'm with you on the production, Shelley. I understand the criticisms against it. Not only do I understand them, I respect them, but also at the same time, and this might be a bit of a petty point to make. I don't necessarily like how good production in some people's minds amounts to every song is almost at exactly the same volume. I feel like some songs benefit from a quieter presence, and having that variation in production on the album is something that I kind of admire for that reason.
Yeah,
It kind of reminds me of Injustice for All when they tuned out the bass.
yeah.
And if you look around, you'll find somebody that actually added the bass sound or up the bass sound, and it sounds so much better when you hear the bass. I kind of feel like that with Blizzard Beast. Like if they had, remastered or whatever to get the production to sound a little bit better, I think Blizzard Beast would easily top Pure Holocaust in my view.
I think I would be interested. So I think I have heard the bass version of Injustice for All, but I think I would be interested to hear like experiments with this album, like re-recording it with a better bass track, a better drum track, like the level sorted out. Because you get re-recordings of things like Goros Under the Sign of Hell, and that definitely didn't need. That was an unnecessary move. I know Dimmu Borgir have done the similar thing with Stormblast. And it, as Tyler mentioned, it really in like contemporary eyes, it really does just mean kind of homogenizing the tracks. Whereas I think as an academic study, this could be quite interesting because there's a lot of layers to Blizzard Beast that kind of, without repeated and intensive listens, can go missed at times. Which, again, as I said, is one of the things that I really love about the album. But I could also see how it would be beneficial to kind of draw out certain elements to it. Not in a way that just makes it, compresses the shit out of it and like makes it all very, very sterile and clinical as sort of contemporary mixes tend to do, but in a way that actually has an interest in the like musical elements that are buried in the sort of cacophony of noise.
Yeah, and I also think that after this album, if I'm not mistaken, they started recording at Abyss Studios. So I don't think they ever came back to the studio that recorded where they recorded Blizzard Beast. So
Wasn't Abyss Studios the studio that Peter Cochran had?
yes, yeah,
Huh.
and at the time it was like the place to record. In the mid to late '90s, I mean, everybody was recording their albums with Peter. I actually remember reading an interview where he thought that Hypocrisy's final chapter was going to be the last album because he was booked solid for like a year and a half in the studio just recording other bands' albums, and he was thinking, okay, this is going to be my full-time job moving forward. I probably won't have time for Hypocrisy. So I guess that's where they got the title Final Chapter. I could be wrong on that, but I recall reading something like that in either Metal Maniacs or uh, oh, what's the one from the UK? It's at the
Terrorizer,
tip of my tongue.
Metal Hammer.
No, Metal Hammer. Thank you. Yes, Metal Hammer.
All right, so if you're here, I have some bad news for you. Next up is At the Heart of Winter. Um, but there is a song title about tragedies on this album. It's Tragedies Blows at Horizon. So Tyler may like that one. But this is where the Demon Oz had left the foray for his own health, his physical wellness when it came to tendonitis and all that. And Abath gained control of Immortal. And you got Abath. Abath is the type of character that I would see listening to a lot of Van Halen, being really inspired by that. And yeah, it's history. This tends to be the album where everyone's really divided on it. Like some people like it, some people hate it. This because of the simple fact that Immortal's sound changed yet again, and it went for a lighter form of metal rather than you go through the discography of Immortal. The first four albums they get harsher and harsher and harsher in different ways. This just dials it all back. It actually focuses on some catchy riffs here and there. Like when I say catchy, not in like a good sense, more like a mindlessness sense where you don't have to think to listen to the music. You don't have to really comprehend what's going on. Just get into the groove, as Madonna would say, "Get into the groove." And there you have your metal from Immortal from this period. Um, there are some good riffs here and there. Like Abbott is obviously a great guitarist, generally speaking, but he may not be a black metal guitarist in terms of creating music. It's more aligned with heavy metal and thrash. There's a lot of long-winded passages, but it's more in like a heavy metal sense or a thrash metal sense. So at the heart of winter, this isn't completely panned by the community in black metal, and I think the reason why is because it was still under the veneer of what Immortal was with being black metal and kind of comical and all that. That it's not to be taken too seriously. But if you look at the musical content on the albums that came before this one, this is where the seriousness in the music goes away. It's more about just being like a heavy metal band, just going up like Venom or something, and just playing on stage, having a good time. So, like I said, there are a few good passages. Withstand the Fall of Time has a couple of good riffs. At the Heart of Winter, the title track has some good riffs, but it's a matter in how it's all presented, and it's a very anti black metal album to me. In regard to like the where it's coming from, it doesn't seem like the Immortal that we love here. It's more of pandering. So yeah, Shelly, what are your thoughts on At the Heart of Winter?
Well, I know the Metal Archives community is not representative of the metal community as a whole, but the classic Immortal albums, some of them are mid 80s. The two that we just talked about, Battles in the North and Blizzard Beast, are like mid 70s. This album has an average of 90% on Metal Archives, so it's quite revered by that particular portion of the fan base. And I don't think I know many people that do it down. So uh, I will shock you and say I don't hate this album. The late 90s were a very, very strange time for black metal and death metal as well, to a great extent. And, a lot of the original kind of wave of black metal, they were trying lots of different things. Immortal decided to kind of do that thing where they kind of infantilize themselves and go back to their roots. There was always, I mean, we mentioned Kiss. I think Wasp deserves mentioning as well. There was always that kind of hair metal, glam metal undertone to Immortal. but it was always latent and peripheral. Whereas with Demonaz having to step aside and about like taking the reins, it becomes very, very explicit. And I think Tyler, in a previous episode, just in passing, mentioned that this album in particular is basically Immortal playing Judas Priest Painkiller. And I think that's really apt because if you approach this as, right, I'm just going to listen to a balls to the wall heavy metal album, it's actually a really enjoyable listen. Some of the riffs are fantastic. The songs are quite long. They do kind of draw out ideas far more than the albums that are going to follow it in terms of Sons of Northern Darkness in particular. There is a lot of intelligent melodic material here as well. But obviously, if you're comparing it to the three albums that preceded it, it is basically a different band. And at this point, you have all the kind of aesthetic hallmarks of that as well. They changed their logo. This is the first album where they don't have them posing in corpse paint on the front cover. It looks more like a power metal album cover. You get this massive cinematic production, huge guitar tone, huge drum tone. You get more explicit use of keyboards. Everything is kind of just revamped, and a strong case could be made for us saying this should have been the beginning of Abbott's solo project. It should have gone under a different name because it is that different. But of this era, if we're talking from 99 to 2009 or whatever, this is definitely the only album that I will return to and genuinely enjoy, but on a very, very different dimension to the dimension that I'd enjoy the classic Immortal albums.
I see. Tyler, what are your thoughts at the Heart of Winter?
My thoughts are pretty similar to Shelley's. I think that the record is a very good heavy metal album, but it is not a black metal album. At this point in time, I'm looking back at it retrospectively, of course, because I was probably, somewhere between 5 and something, 10 years old during this period of black metal history. Looks kind of like black metal had shat the bed. You had Enslaved going more into their boring progressive material, Gorgoth just trying to repeat past successes. You had heights of the genre reached by artists like Burzum as a major standout that pretty much all of black metal just shied away from rather than trying to build upon and move forward from. Like they thought, okay, this is about as far as it can go. We can't really match that, so we're just going to ride on the coattails of what's been done before us. And as a result, some of the better black metal artists kind of, for a brief period of time, ran away into other genres. You had people like Fenrir doing ambient side projects. You had Beharit releasing electronic material. You had Burzum releasing electronic material. And I think that this album may, at least to some extent, be a product of that same impulse of, okay, I don't really feel like I can do anything more with black metal. I don't know how to do anything more with it. So I'm just going to do something else instead, because if I just keep trying to make black metal as it's already been made, I'm going to be awash in a sea of imitators. Um, and as a heavy metal record, as Shelley has already said, it's a very strong record for heavy metal. I would say it's about on the quality of Judas Priest's Painkiller, which to me is like the traditional heavy metal record to beat. Like if you're going to write a good heavy metal record, it should at least be that good, if not better. Of course, that being said, traditional heavy metal only has pretty much throughout its entire career only reaches a certain level of profundity in its music, and generally that's just kind of a vague sense of some kind of glory in the music. It doesn't reach a kind of truly life-shattering sense of world perspective that you get in some of the best of death and black metal, especially that Immortal had reached on the heights of their previous albums. So I guess in summary, I would say it is an okay album for what it is. I would not be disappointed if I never heard it again. I wouldn't feel like I was missing out on something essential, but I'm not irritated if I hear it. It's not something that I immediately want to shut off or that I think is an example of some of the worst aspects of what happened to heavy metal.
So me being the feral extreme metal guy that I am, like I either listen to classical music, extreme metal, or pop music pretty much nowadays. Like comes on my Spotify. I really do not listen to heavy metal or thrash. as an adult.
So I have one
So
question for you, Jason, before we hand to Jaime. So we mentioned earlier that Mountains of Might is kind of like a prelude to the style that you get on At the Heart of Winter. I accept.
you mentioned that
Sorry?
it wasn't a we, that was a you.
Well, we as in me and Tyler. So I was going to put it to you as like, how would you? Because I do agree there is a difference, but how would you contrast a track like Mountains of Might with the style on At the Heart of Winter? Just out of interest. I'm not trying to trip you up or anything.
Well, the development and the middle keyboard section, all that just builds, and the it's really the gravitas of it is different than what is being expressed on At the Heart of Winter. I get a feeling that it's not heavy metal. I mean, it could be technically heavy metal to some people in terms of the techniques being used, but it presents an expression greater than that to me with how it's narrative, to use that term again, uh, and it's the content of it too is it's it's different. It's one of those tracks that yes, it is anthemic to an extent, like heavy metal is, but in a different way. This is more about having a very flowing nature where it's not necessarily about catchiness, and it's more about the message being conveyed. It's more about how the passages evolve from the horrible production to like keyboard synthesizers and all that, and how it builds up into this great culmination. Um, and
Thank you.
I don't get the same feeling from At the Heart of Winter. At the Heart of Winter, there's longer winded passages. There's uh, blatant heavy metalism. I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. It's not something that I'm into personally. Mountains
I
of
was going to
Minds
say, do you secretly
doesn't.
like Pizza Fresh? Because you like the Mountains of Might.
We got him.
Pineapple on the pizza
No, I mean
thrash.
the riffs are different in that song.
No, I'm kidding.
Jaime,
I do agree that I think there is a narrative element to At the Heart of Winter, but I think in general that is not where Abat's interests lie. He is more of a heavy metal guitarist, and you see that in particular on his side project I, and on his more recent solo stuff. And yeah, I think At the Heart of Winter is like the exception to that because there's still this vestigial. I mean, Demoness was still involved in the project, but there's still this vestigial stuff from the earlier Immortal period. But I definitely agree that the kind of raw materials might be similar on Mountains of Might, but they're presented in a very different way to
the
what you get.
expression is way
Like,
different. The expression is way different.
yeah, no,
Um,
I do agree.
when I listen to Mountains of Might, I get the feeling of like this is a force of nature, like this. You're talking about a land mass that's on a form of land that is vertically erected, and when you look at the Heart of Winter, you're talking about more of like a human type of thing, whereas yeah, Blizzard Beast is more about like a force of nature, like things we cannot control. We talk about like innovators being like those who can move mountains, but no, these mountains are fucking mighty. They will stop you from moving them. But Jaime, what are your thoughts about At the Heart of Winter?
I'll start off with kind of piggybacking off of what Tyler and Shelly had said that, 99 was a really weird year for black metal. The first thing that was prominent was that the underground feud between death metal and black metal had kind of started dying out after the world domination tour with Marduk and Immortal and Cannibal Corpse happened. So there was a little bit more of accepting, I guess, of less of a feud, and um, a lot of bands started going in really different directions. I vividly remember being super pumped about getting the Satyricon Rebel Extravaganza album because I was really hoping it would continue where Nemesis Divina had left off, and being severely disappointed when I popped in that CD, and yeah, I think I threw it out the window literally 10 seconds into the first song. Um, being that being said, I was hesitant to listen to At the Heart of Winter because I felt that Blizzard Beast had kind of left a bad taste in my mouth from the poor production and the mix, and factoring in that Demon Oz had stepped down because of his tendonitis. one of the backbones of Immortal gone. It just kind of, I was very hesitant to listen to it. A friend of mine actually had the CD, and he popped it into his car when we were going out to get some food, and I was really surprised. The first thing you hear is just the production value is just way better than any of the previous Immortal albums. So right off the bat, I thought, okay, all right, well, it's not as in your face and 1,000 miles per hour like Battles in the North or Blizzard Beast, but the production is good. I can hear the instruments clearly. It's structured nicely. Granted, as Shelley had mentioned, it wasn't really Immortal. It was more like Abath and the Immortals. So I understood that, hey, there's going to be a little bit of a change. So, it's not so bad. I really can't talk down to it. It's not a bad album, but it's not Immortal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I think that's why I kind of said they should have changed their name at that point, as I think some of the other bands that Tyler mentioned as well probably should have done. Because yeah, as we sort of mentioned, a lot of them were trying to reconcile themselves to the fact that they'd kind of taken what they could do as far as they could go, and Glassbring in these different directions. Dark Throne were going for a particularly dark time. Many of them had abandoned metal altogether. So yeah, maybe a complete name change would have been beneficial, but
So I have a funny anecdote just about Blizzard Beasts and all that. I used to work in a job that I had to like title things in a mainframe that I would change in a mainframe, like systematic changes, and that would affect a lot of different things. And I had to title each thing that I did, and I always used Immortal songs as the title. It was like, "Here's your mountains of might," and all of that, and the names I would title everything for everyone to see too. So, a job I had. But yeah, so next up is Damned in Black. And damned if it sucks. um, so I had bought this album when it came out. And I actually liked the song "Damned in Black" back then, but as I'm older now, and I either just want like classical music, death and black metal music to think about, like thinking man's music. I really fucking hate this album, and I hate even the song "Damned in Black" nowadays. I know it's super fucking catchy, but it's catchy in a knuckleheaded, mindless way that it's just primed for Vakken, where you get all your drunk, festival goers, in unison, just praising, simplistic, fucking stupid ass uh, catchiness. Yeah, Damned in Black is Abath being unchained. Perhaps with At the Heart of Winter, he still felt a little bit obligated to create, some good music here and there. But Damned in Black is that album. Like even the filler tracks, they fucking suck. Um, Absolutely hate the album. It is more of a heavy metal album than anything else, not black metal. Shelly, what are your thoughts?
I always forget this album exists. I always think they go straight from At the Heart of Winter to Sons of Northern Darkness. That is basically because this is an album of B-sides. I think even fans of this era of Immortal kind of they don't really rate it very highly because there isn't the showstopper riffs, the sense of like this grand anthemic chorus or these really great, memorable melodies or anything like that. It's more just a sort of a series of filler tracks. And yeah, the title track um, is probably the most recommendable, but that's really not saying much. Um, and I think to sort of come on your point around Vakken metal, so we talked a bit about how turn of the century was a very weird time for black metal, and it wasn't just the fact that the second wave artists were starting to try and reconcile themselves to the fact that they were kind of running out of steam and trying to find new forms of inspiration, new genres to express themselves in, but also the genre was becoming popularized to a kind of frightening extent, and this was the beginnings of when extreme metal as a phrase became it much more in currency rather than segregating off. You've got your death metal, you've got your black metal, you've got your grindcore and thrash and so on. You would start to get more generic. No, we're just extreme metal, and we pull together all of these different elements. And obviously, Immortal being, you know, elements of melodic death metal, elements of thrash, elements of black metal, elements of classic heavy metal, and so on. And you see that with the popularization of bands like Dark Funeral, Cradle of Filth, Dimmu Borgir, Behemoth, who all had their origins within particular scenes and particular regions and styles, and were heavily influenced by the quote unquote like legends of those scenes, but we're all starting to create what I basically call Disney extreme metal. And I think Damned in Black through to the follow up Sons of Northern Darkness is kind of Immortal's answer to that, in that it's very populist, very accessible, and it makes you feel like you're consuming a product that is somehow extreme or underground or profound because there is melodic density to it, but it is very much a fucking Big Mac, basically, compared to a pure Holocaust.
Shelley, do you think self-referential albums tend to be lesser in quality in general? Because like an album title of Damned in Black, as in black metal or Wearing Black, it's kind of self-referential. Do you think that may have like a thing about it where it's more about the vibe of what they're wanting to express rather than like a profundity or anything like that? It's more of like a more accessible title for the album. It's like, hey, we wear black, we are black metal, blah 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 blah, and we're damned in black. And do you think that may have something like just messaging out to the masses for approval? Do you think that has something to do like with the mindset that they were at that point in time, like with Abbott? I think Abbott is more of like a Van Halen guy, and I can see him as like, yeah, we're that person that you perceive of us. It's like
Yeah,
you're self.
um, it's a red flag. I wouldn't say it's necessarily true because, like, Dark Throne had a track on Under a Full Moon called Unholy Black Metal. Beherit had Metal of Death, which again, it's not the most sophisticated Beherit track, which is saying something, but it has its place. And when it's done right, it can just be quite a fun quirk. But definitely by this point, Immortal were a big budget, kind of quite a big metal band at this point, and doing the self-referential stuff. It's what I'd call like mana warring your style. And it's one of the things that really kind of indicated that bands like Asphyx were on the way out when they started just singing about how awesome they are at playing death metal. It's kind of like, okay, it's getting very tired now. This is kind of just a feedback loop. And I think on your point around Abat, like I saw Immortal, I think it's the only time I saw Immortal actually at Hellfest in France. And it was on the main stage and they were playing after Twisted Sister. And Twisted Sister were doing their thing. I was watching their set, waiting for Immortal, and then they handed over. And Immortal played a few tracks off Pure Holocaust and Battles in the North, but for the most part, it was I think they just released All Shall Fall, and there was lots of Sons of Northern Darkness on there. And I was struck by how like suited that style was to large festival, large audience, lots of fist bumping and singing along, and not that people shouldn't do that at a gig, but it felt like a stadium metal band playing, and that kind of really brought home to me how different that era of Immortal was to the much more abstract, I guess, of the first four albums.
Oh, we'll get into that with the Sons of Northern Darkness, but I believe it's Tyler's time to speak.
I mentioned earlier how in this era of black metal, around the time of At the Heart of Winter, black metal had shat the bed, so to speak, and a lot of the better artists were fleeing the genre. I think that after that, what you saw was a phenomenon of black metal artists doing recombining parts of heavy metal in general with black metal as and repackaging it as if it were something novel. You had black thrash, melodic black metal, blackened death metal, um, black and roll, to talk about Satyricon again. And I know that for a certain period of Immortal's career, namely the albums from this period, Immortal was referred to fairly often as a black thrash band of sorts. Um, and probably a little bit more popular than what is properly called black thrash. Um, but you can hear it in the sound. You can definitely hear the influence of speed metal. I mean, I think you can hear the influence of speed metal in a lot of the more popular genres of this time, like melodic death metal and so on and so forth. But you can definitely hear an Immortal sound. I will say, and I brought this up before we started recording the episode, that there are some riffs, a few on this album, that are really well written riffs that I almost wish would have been present on their better material in the context of a better written song. But other than that, the overall gestalt of the album has nothing redeeming about it. It is all aesthetic. It's all about having cool, catchy, rhythmic, heavy metal riffs for you to enjoy if heavy metal just happens to be the flavor of beer that you like to drink when you're out partying. And Immortal really just kept going down this path even harder from this point forward.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that sentiment. It's one of those things that's just kind of there, and it's strange because people who who I would say are false, as in meaning they're not into like really extreme stuff and finding the beauty in extreme metal. They tend to love shit like Damned in Black and At the Heart of Winter and Sons of Northern Darkness. They're I I I, I don't want to say like they're dumb or anything. It's just I don't think they really understand what the true expression was of the earlier material and how like life changing it could be for some people. Um, Listening to early death metal was really profound for me back when I was a kid, and then black metal when I was a teenager, and hearing dumbed down versions of that in a black metal band, like playing heavy metal and thrash and all that. It just really it feels like an insult to me, and it feels like just sonic wallpaper. That's just there for people to bob their heads to at festivals while they're inebriated. Jaime, what are your thoughts on Damned in Black?
This album didn't do much for me when it came out. I remember vividly that this was an album that came out rather quickly after At the Heart of Winter. If I'm not mistaken, it was like maybe a year and a half. It wasn't too far off. I remember also reading that a lot of bands on Osmos were leaving. Some of the original black metal bands that originally signed to Osmos were leaving Osmos. I guess Herv was being difficult to work with or what have you. So I feel like maybe this album might have taken that Roadrunner Deicide approach where Deicide started cranking out those last crappy albums just to fulfill their contract with Roadrunner so they could jump ship to another label. I feel that's what's happening here. I could be wrong, but that's the vibe I got. Nothing memorable in my opinion on this album. I mean, you can even probably change the name to Damned in Mediocrity because it wasn't really anything special on this. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, the title track is perhaps the strongest track from it, and it's not saying much. It's long winded, and there are some passages that kind of go with each other, but it's a very shallow sense. And speaking of shallow music, we have Sons of Northern Darkness up next, and this album was fucking caught on fire, and everyone fucking loved it at the time when it came out. Uh, but this was literally what we're talking about. All the faults of the last album, Damned in Black. Sons of Northern Darkness just really leaned into it even more. Uh, Granted, there are some riffs that are very complicated and technically challenging, but the whole presentation is about being very catchy, Vakken, not a thinking man's music type of thing, just like vibing out to, just anthemic types of riffage. And the riffs that are here, like if this was a heavy metal band, it would be fucking a chart topper. Really, it would. But parading around as a black metal band, I think it really does an injustice to black metal because it's not black metal in the least. the whatever aesthetics you get from like the vocals or some of the production values on the guitar riffs that may seem quite black metal, it's really just heavy metal under the veneer of black metal, and it's just anthemic. It's just where you get fucking blasted and you can't think, and you just bob your head to it at a festival, and you know, hopefully you have a good time with your friends. That's what it's about. Sons of Northern Darkness, Shelley.
Oh yeah, we're moving into living memory for me now. I think I was 13 when this came out, and it was just when I was getting into black metal as well. And I think I very quickly got hold of Pure Holocaust after this as well from my Guildford HMV. And yeah, obviously at the time I didn't have much discernment. I was like, yeah, this is pretty like cool stuff. Listening back to it now, especially in comparison to the two albums that preceded it, it is remarkable just how basic it is. And I think Jaime's point on the switch from Osmos to Nuclear Blast is a good one because they definitely tried to up their game in terms of being very I don't want to say commercial, but definitely, as you mentioned, Jason, like ingratiating themselves to a much broader audience. There are some technical riffs on here, but for the most part, it is really basic, really easy to follow. Um, Always got its mind on like the showstopper moment. Like you have tracks like In My Kingdom Cold, which is, it's all pivots on this, catchy kind of almost groovy chorus. And you have this really basic breakdown as well, where you kind of just want to kill yourself by the end because it's just this one chugging chord, and they go round again, and even the back kind of announces, and here we go again, as if it's like a fucking disco song. Um, I would say like the first three tracks are probably the most interesting because they managed to achieve a flash of their former selves in terms of like combining the barbaric energy with a sense of atmosphere. But after that, it really takes a nosedive into just really I don't want to. I can't really think of anything more intellectual than say they're very boring. Even compared to like Damned in Black, I would say it's really as basic as they come, and you definitely get the sense that they are basically appealing to the kind of people that would follow nuclear blast bands. And yeah, we keep mentioning this Wacken metal thing, and just to sort of specify again, that is that what that was talking about earlier, the sort of black metal via stadium rock kind of vibe with, always focusing on making the riffs massive, making the choruses massive, and all of the songs completely bind around that so that there is no possibility for anything else to happen. There's no room for any other kind of creativity or flashes of really abstract weirdness. It's all just about the anthems basically. So yeah, very much the. It's always depressing doing these focus episodes because we talk about
Well,
talk about
it's beer metal.
yeah, we always talk about the albums that we absolutely love and the classic eras, and then it slowly takes the nosedive, usually by the late 90s. So yeah, that's where Immortal were by the early 2000s. So yeah, very very disappointing.
All right, Tyler.
While I feel that there are some riffs on Damned in Black that are good enough that I almost wish they were present on good Immortal albums, can't say that about Sons of Northern Darkness. They have fully embraced the Wacken metal stereotype, and that gets brought up often in this episode for a reason, because out of all of the black metal bands from the classic period of black metal, Immortals form of selling out, so to speak, was to become Wacken metal. Other bands went down different roads of selling out, whether they went for the black and roll approach or whether they went for sounding like wimpy, progressive, by which they just mean really boring and whiny and self-pitying. Immortal didn't go choose any of those roads. They chose becoming anthemic, fist-pumping Wacken heavy metal with Popeye vocals, and that identity had been fully embraced by this point. As I said, they were just trying to make a career for themselves out of that. And one of the worst parts of it is I think that they were rather proud of it. If you saw interviews with them from around that time talking about the classic black metal scene, they almost have a kind of scorn for the more radical elements of the early black metal scene, like they were stupid and childish and immature for doing the more radical things they did. And that's not me condoning those actions, but I think it just goes to show that Immortal had developed this attitude that part of being an adult was not being wild and creative and having passionate ideas, but just going about your craft as if it was a job. And I think that's the kind of attitude that produces Wacken style heavy metal. So yeah, Immortal was dead at this point. It'll be interesting to talk about the next album because I think that they almost went bad in a different way, but they were dead by the time this came out.
I'm glad you brought up the attitude they had to other black metal. So, Jaime, do you want to just come in on that, and then I want to return to that point as well. So, yeah, what are your views on Sons of Northern Darkness?
Yeah, to piggyback off of what you guys are saying, yeah, this was to me kind of like the Metallica Black album for Metallica, where they got so popular and they slowed things down and they moved things towards more of a mainstream approach. In this case, the Vakken crowd would love this album. I think this was their. I don't know if it's best to say this, but again, I'm just throwing this out there. I think this was their peak in popularity album. Um, One theme that I did notice, and again, I would love to get you guys' input on this, is they've been recording. This is what their second album at Abyss Studios or third album. And as you see, once Abbott took over the band because Demonaz jumped off, it started becoming, like you had mentioned, Abbott's band. But I also wonder how much Peter from Hypocrisy had to influence the sound and the style on those albums, especially Sons of Northern Darkness, because if you can compare it to what Hypocrisy was cranking out around the same time, they were kind of in the similar vein of getting that Vakken style of crowd pleasing that they were going for.
I'd need to now do a search on the bands and albums that were released around this time that were recorded at the same studio, because it would be interesting to see. We always talk about like, the Morrisound thing or the Sunlight Studios thing or whatever. It'd be interesting to see like the homogenization of metal around this time coming from particular studios.
Yeah, I think we might be pleasantly surprised to see how much. I'm not saying they're going to be sounding similar, but in the same style. And again, the question goes back to how much did Peter influence these guys when, I mean, again, because again, he had a great studio, everybody wanted to record in it. I would not be surprised if a lot of these bands were just hanging on Peter's every word on what they would need to do to record.
Yeah, definitely. And to come back to Tyler's point as well, I think I remember seeing a documentary. I can't remember which one it was now. Not one of the ultra famous ones, but it interviewed like the key figures in Norwegian black metal. It was one of these sort of earlier pre-YouTube documentaries, not very long, but it was kind of interviewing some of these characters when they were still embroiled in the ideology of black metal or kind of trying to come to terms with what it might mean from an artistic perspective and not necessarily a political one. And you get some quite profound moments. I think they interviewed Isan from Emperor and stuff, and then it kind of just cuts to an interview with Immortal where it's kind of funny. They say no, 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 it's not all about this. It's not about any of that philosophy. It's about spikes and it's about leather. And again, you get the sense that they were either by accident or design the real inheritors of Wasp heavy metal, basically. And not that they were embarrassed by their first four albums, but that they kind of just decided to take a very, very different route in terms of how they were going to approach becoming more commercial and almost like laughing off the fact that they might have taken it seriously once. And as you alluded to, Tyler, it's like that's their way of trying to be mature about it rather than saying, no, actually, there was quite a lot of interesting artistry packed within those albums, and maybe we could face that head on. We're just going to basically smooth off the rough edges of our sound and become an entertainment product for all intents and purposes.
Well, I would have had
I
more
agree with that
respect for
sentiment.
them if they just would have simply said, "Hey, we don't do that, but we have respect for the artistry. We think it was because you brought up Isan. Isan clearly made horrible music later in his career, but whenever asked about the classic black metal scene, he has nothing but respect for it, and he mentions how they were incredibly creative people. He may agree or disagree on various points with their actions or their beliefs, but they were very creative people who created powerful music. And he's even said on multiple occasions, I don't think I could ever do anything on that level ever again. I also remember when Engram came out, he from his official YouTube account commented on Beharit's YouTube account and said something like, "Thank you for keeping the spirit of true black metal alive." Um, and Immortal doesn't have that attitude. I mean, even when they've directly mentioned some of the classic black metal artists, like I know he's controversial, but they were talking about Burzum once, and they were talking about, of course, about the nefarious things that he had gotten up to, his crimes and whatnot. And they were, it's not so much that I disagree with their point, because I feel like that's a matter of debate, but just the way his tone when he was just like, yeah, he fucked up. He fucked up and he did something stupid and he had to go to jail for it. It was just like the attitude of like real adults know that you don't play around with silly, dramatic ideas about what life is supposed to be about. You just go out there and you make your money. That's like the tone of voice I got from him.
I think that was on Until the Light Takes Us, actually, that interview, where again, I think the documentary I'm referencing is from earlier, but yeah, you do get that on that documentary as well, where you get Fenrir as well is like being very, very sincere and thoughtful about that period, and kind of, you could see he's coming to terms with it himself. So a lot of his thoughts on it are coming from a very personal place. And then, yeah, you get Immortal, who are, they're not being clowns in that documentary, but they are definitely trying to put across a certain perspective that is very much aligned with the Immortal of that time, which was basically black metal as an entertainment product. They're trying to distance themselves from making themselves look foolish by taking it too seriously in any way.
All right, Metal Jaime. Any thoughts on Sons of Northern Darkness?
We done that bit, mate.
Oh, I took a piss real quick. All right, so we're on to All Shall Fall. Uh, I have only heard like a song or two from this album, and I absolutely hated it. I know our friend Daniel Jaime, he liked it when it came out, and I don't understand why. It was more of a perhaps he was missing something new that sounded black metal-y. But as Shelley had stated, this is where they leaned into the meme nature of Immortal. You look at the music video, and I haven't seen it forever, but what was really off putting to me was that it was a CGI Abbott, and the music itself did not express anything, and it was subpar in every way possible. But yeah, I really haven't listened to this album. I don't have much to say about it. I was really off put by it. Shelley, have you listened to this album?
I
All Shall Fall by Immortal?
I own this album. um, I I don't want to get too literal and obvious about it, but the video for Blasian and Mighty Raven Dark, they're on an actual mountain. The video for All Shall Fall, they're against a green screen. I think that kind of sums up the difference between Classic Immortal and what they'd become. And I mentioned just now that Sons of Nova Darkness, I do vaguely remember that album coming out, and by 2009, obviously, I was steeped within the lore of black metal. I knew what I liked, I knew what I didn't like, and I do remember anticipating this album quite heavily because it was like the era of comeback albums by this point, the late 2000s, the early 2010s. So many of the classic bands that I kind of thought, because I'd missed like the initial wave, I thought I'd missed all of that, and all of these older bands suddenly started reforming or releasing comeback albums or return to form albums, and Immortal kind of rode that wave because they broke up for a brief period in the 2000s. But at this point, Immortal knew that they were a meme, and memes were a thing by this point. And they were kind of black metal's answers to that. In that, even by early Immortal, I mean, we talked about the Call of the Winter Moon video. They didn't take things all that seriously all the time, even though some of their music was incredibly serious. They had a very, very good sense of fun compared to a lot of their peers. But by this point, it had morphed into um, almost this like toxic need to never take yourself seriously or make yourself at risk of being vulnerable by creating a statement that could actually be really interesting and profound. So they always played it safe. They always winked to the audience. Did more than wink actually, and they always made it clear that black metal was open for ridicule. It was open season, and yeah, there's a lot to ridicule about black metal. It is incredibly silly, But if you're not at least trying to move the artistry forward or do push the boundaries or do something interesting with it, then yeah, you are essentially playing stadium rock. And that's what this album did. Ironically, I think I prefer it to Sons of Northern Darkness because I think musically it is slightly more interesting, but I still do detest it for what it was, which was basically Immortal joining the bullies in a sense and saying, "Hey, like we're on your side actually. We don't take this too seriously either. We're kind of, the court jesters essentially. I think that's the best way I could put it is they were joining in with the laughter and saying, actually no, yeah, it is all for fun. We're not that serious. We're not going to try anything that risky or daring anymore. We're just going to join in with the laughter and kind of poke fun of it as well and give you new material, which yeah, this album kind of exemplifies that era for me. So yeah, not a great chapter in black metal history.
Yeah, Tyler.
So to speak on Shelley's point, I'll say something that my manager once told me, which is that if you don't make mistakes, it means you're not working very much. And I think that goes to um, kind of emphasize the point that with early black metal doing things that were silly or ridiculous, it's because they weren't afraid to be seen as silly or ridiculous in the pursuit of communicating the things that were important to them, the things that inspired them. When you become afraid of that, you limit yourself from being able to express yourself fully because now you're taking into consideration the factor of how is this going to be viewed by other people. Um, but what's musically interesting, and I use that term conditionally, about All Shall Fall is that it is kind of in a different direction in some ways than Damned in Black and Sons of Northern Darkness. You hear a lot more integration of what Abath was starting to do with his project. I think it was called I at the time, before he just went full on solo Abath. In that there's a lot more Motorhead riffing and other even more blatant heavy metal, classic heavy metal riffing than what you heard on the past three albums. Um, and in many ways, the integration of Immortal into just black metal flavored product, that I think that kind of riffing is indicative of, had gotten to the point that I feel that this is possibly the worst Immortal album out of their entire discography. They're being very blatant about what it is they're trying to do, and it sounds incredibly uninspired as a result.
Yeah, I agree with that. Granted, I haven't spent much time with the album. I haven't even listened to the entire thing because I heard a few tracks and it was like horrible. Jaime, what do you think about All Shall Fall?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Tyler here with the fact that it was not, to me, it was kind of like the lowest point so far with Immortal. I believe this album was what, 6 years, 5 6 years after Sons of Northern Darkness, something like that. So there was like a huge gap between albums. I felt that Abath had really at this point had really just made this the Abath band period, and I couldn't find anything memorable on this album. You have your, like mentioned, the Motorhead style of riffs and musical aspects, but to me, at that in 2009, you had a lot of those bands, so it was really hard for Immortal to really stand out. I think in this one, my opinion was they were just phoning it in to make that nice check because at this point they were pretty well established with the extreme crowd, especially the Vakken crowd. So no matter what they cranked out, they were going to make some money off of it. I don't know how much Abbott's alcohol consumption had to do with that, or if maybe he was just like, you know what, whatever we do, it's gonna make good money, so just whatever. But I just did not get that. The band got together and really worked on the songs, and this is like the best product that we can crank out. I didn't get that vibe at all.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah,
Um, just at this point, sorry, Jason, to sort of take the reins for a second, but I wonder if we could maybe, if we do have anything to say about the Demonaz era, like the last two albums, we could maybe talk about that. But I do have a couple of other points that I want to unpack about Classic Immortal, but I'm just aware of the time as well. So if people are all right with us just maybe discussing the last two ones
Right.
together, if we want to say anything on them.
There's
Um.
not much to say,
So
so
I.
I would be all right with that.
All right. So the two. So what happened? There was a lawsuit with the owner's rights to the name of Immortal. Obviously, Demonus, he had walked away because of his tendonitis, but he still scribed the lyrics for Immortal. Um, and then he had a battle with Abbott about the owner rights to the name Immortal. I think he won. And so now the band Immortal dwarfed into Demonus doing what he wants to do now. And it's really more thrash metal than black metal. Northern Chaos Gods has a couple of cool ideas, but it really stands firmly in that shallow type of sonic wallpaper, black metal, thrash metal, whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of there and doesn't really develop anywhere interesting. And I did listen to Northern Chaos Gods, which came out in 2018. War Against All is the newest album that came out last year. I listened to a couple of tracks or parts of tracks, and he's just leaning more into the thrash metal influence. So yeah, it's safe to say that even Demonos taking the reins again, he's doing an Abbott with just catering to the Vulcan crowd. Uh,
Well, yeah, it kind of
it's really
mirrors
a
it
shame.
mirrors what happened with Gorgoroth in that they went for a bitter legal dispute, and I kind of thought once Infernus run the rights to Gorgoroth, it's like, oh, we're going to get a good Gorgoroth album again. It's like, no, he's just written like the most sterile, cookie cutter versions of older Gorgoroth, and it's kind of similar to what Demonaz is doing in that you can tell that he's trying to reinvigorate the spirit of Immortal, but the passion and the
Yeah,
spontaneity is not there anymore.
he's going for the aesthetic. Yeah, it's too obvious. It's too on the head. Like uh, the album's name is Northern Chaos Gods, and he has the song "Gates of Blashik," or however you pronounce that. "Mighty Raven Dark" is his own song, and when we look at these albums, they're more aligned with thrash metal than they are with black metal. And I think that's really the greatest travesty. Um, yeah, the follow up album is it's just kind of pandering. It looks like a paycheck, and nothing more. And maybe he may view it as being invigorated. I'm immortal now, or whatever. But the magic that was there in the early Immortal albums, which he did craft all the guitar riffs, is very absent here. It's very shallow type of music that he's creating now, and that may lend itself to how like Morbid Angel evolved over time, where in their youthful days they had a lot to express, and when they got older, they really didn't have anything. So yeah, it's nothing burger. They're both F tier albums if we're going to rank
Do you,
them.
did Jaime and Tyler, do you have any thoughts on them at all? Or?
I would say relatively they're an improvement on All Shall Fall and maybe even on Sons of Northern Darkness and Damned in Black, but that's very much relatively. They try to aim more for the better kind of riffing you heard partly on At the Heart of Winter and maybe even somewhat more of a fury that kind of harkens back to Blizzard Beast. But the unfortunate thing is that they're just trying to recreate past successes with these albums. So while they're not as blatantly selling out as what Abbott was trying to do further and further on into Immortal's career when he was in control, they're also not doing anything original or artistic or creative. So they're largely bypassable. And as a matter of fact, the two albums, you could talk about them together because they're nearly identical. To reference the self referential thing, there is a track on War Against All literally titled Immortal, which I think speaks volumes as to their mindset.
Jaime, any thoughts?
I agree with Tyler. To me, I felt that Northern Chaos Gods was Demon as saying, okay, I've got the reins now. Let's get this back to where we left off with Blizzard Beasts. and I don't know what happened in the writing, but it just didn't come out like that. I honestly think Northern Chaos Gods was the heir to the throne after At the Heart of Winter to come in for an Immortal album, because whatever fell in between for those other albums, The Sons of Darkness, and Also Fall and Damned in Black, I just didn't like any of those albums. I wasn't a fan of War Against All either. I thought that Demon Oz kind of regressed in some of the aspects and just kind of was trying to do filler. But yeah, nothing memorable on either one. But I did feel that Northern Chaos Gods just had a little bit more flavor than War Against All.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think
All right,
I've
Shirley.
only listened to the final album once, but yeah, I definitely agree with that assessment. There was one last point that I wanted to raise, if people are amenable to one last talking point. Um, Last episode we did a Canadian black metal tier list, and we discussed Frozen Shadows, Don Libra de Immortal, In the Arms of the Immortals album, and I referenced the fact that it kind of sounds like a mix of Pure Holocaust and In the Night Side Eclipse. Although it's not as good as either of those albums, but it's definitely like an ancestor of Immortal. And I got to thinking, like, a really popular and really crap modern black metal band, Lamp of Murmur, released an album a couple of years ago that basically rips off At the Heart of Winter. And then I got to thinking, of the first four Immortal albums, uh, who are the inheritors of that sound? So for a band like Darkthrone or Emperor or Burzum or even Mayhem, you can think of like hordes of black metal bands that aped that style and just try to imitate it, repurpose it beyond like to death. With Immortal, am I missing something? Because yeah, they do have a huge influence. Their shadow is vast over black metal, but particularly those four albums, not the sort of melodic thrash era. What bands kind of carried on the flame of that really quirky run from Pure Holocaust to Blizzard Beasts?
Well, I would say, in terms of like a bird's eye view, looking at like the evolution of the sound, being very drastic from album to album, Morbid Angel comes to mind. That is closest to like how Immortal
But
progressed. Um,
they predate Immortal though. They weren't influenced by
they
them, were they?
predate him, yeah. They predate him, but I can draw a parallel there to how they both evolved and changed their sound album to album, but still made stellar material. When it comes to just a band aping an immortal sound, Hate Force comes to mind. They reached nowhere close to what Immortal did early on. And Frozen Shadows. I did hear some Immortals kind of stuff here and there. I would say they more lean into the Emperor side than Immortal. Um, and yeah, there's really when you're talking about the first four albums of Immortal, granted, perhaps we can nix the first one because the first one is just Bathory worship taken to the extreme, um, and the ones that followed, there was a direct evolution. There was artistic intent with those albums, and I don't see that with other bands. I really do not see something like that has molded itself into such a firm statement of what it was trying to express. Yeah, Immortal is an anomaly. Demon Oz is a fucking genius. At least he was. Um, Early on, just really hungry and feral and had the technical proficiency to elevate the music beyond his contemporaries.
There are some bands out of the second wave um, that were ranged from decent to pretty good that I think had some Immortal influence in their music. I would say the good albums by Gorgoroth, um, Pentagram, and I don't know if Antichrist is an album or an EP, um, but they had some Immortal influence in how they approached melody and harmonization of melodies. Ancient on Svartalfheim had some influences from Immortal, I feel. To some extent, although not quite as good, Sorcier des Glace, kind of talking about the Canadian black metal thing again, I think had some influence from Immortal and how they approached some of their melody. Um, but as far as like direct imitators the way you saw with Darkthrone and Burzum and Mayhem. I don't really feel that that ever became a phenomenon in black metal.
It is interesting
Jaime,
that
do you
because it just speaks to we talk a lot about the quirks of those albums, but it just speaks to how unimitatable they were compared to like Transylvanian Hunger or whatever. I don't know. Jaime, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I hear hints of Immortal in different bands. Ice Vind from Norway is one of them. Darken Nocturne Slaughter Cult is another. Not necessarily 100% copycat, but I do hear like little bits and pieces in there mixed in. I guess to a certain extent, even a band like Black Braid, and I know a lot of people don't like Black Braid, but you can hear a little bit of Immortal. As Jason had mentioned, Hate Forest is also another one, but it is hard to duplicate it, just because every album with Immortal was kind of different up until we got to the early 2000s when it just kind of started getting mediocre. But it's a difficult group to 100% find a newish band that has a lot of elements of what they had. They pick up a little bit here and there, but you don't get the full recipe.
Yeah, and I think we said that before on the podcast too, where it's like, who are the Immortal imitators? There's a billion fucking Dark Throne ones. There's a lot of Emperor clones trying to do symphonic black metal. And then, there's obviously a lot of Burzum clones, which I guess you can tie Burzum and Dark Throne together, stylistically speaking, and production values and all that. But where it comes to Immortal, they're an anomaly. You can't pinpoint a band. It's like, okay, this band sounds like Immortal 100% or anything like that. Like, that's their meat and potatoes. It's usually the other Norwegian bands that people are drawn to more in replicating the styles than Immortal, because I think Immortal is. I think the comment that there was death metal DNA in every for the first four albums is very apt, because I think it really was there. And yes, the first album was a battery, taken to the extreme, but there's also some death metal elements to it, and that's kind of just present in all the Immortal albums, through the first four that I consider to be canon. Anything after like when it comes to At Heart of Winter, it's not canon to me. It's the first four, um, where they drastically changed their sound and became like Falcon pop and all that, um, and lost all profundity. I yeah, it's just an anomaly. They're a freak. Immortal is a freak, and perhaps the expression was too intimate. That's why they're clowns. Publicly speaking, they're clowns.
Well, I'm glad. No, I'm glad. I'm glad we drawn that point out a little bit because I thought I was missing something. But I'm glad you guys tend to agree, especially with like the classic era in terms of just how like I don't think it goes said enough in terms of when in discussions of second wave Norwegian black metal. Just they were an oddity. Uh, we kind of overlooked that because they were very direct with their presentation and very kind of they weren't using keyboards or like fancy time signatures or whatever. There was a lot of technical aspects to it, but they were really quite experimental, and that doesn't often get acknowledged when we're talking about that scene and that time. So yeah, I'm glad we unpacked that a little bit.
And you don't get any female vocals either in any of their albums, which, around the 2000s, that's when a lot of these black metal bands started adding a lot of female vocals or whispers or what have you, just to add to more of the atmosphere. But you don't get that in Immortal albums.
I think that's
Yeah,
why Jason loves them so much because he tends to hate women. So
they're not for the girls. Yeah. I think that with like
I
Darkthrone.
don't hate women. Jaime knows I have had 1,000 girlfriends, so he's my proof. Jaime, like all the women that I've been with, it proves that I've not hated women. But yeah,
sorry, Jason, cheap shot. Tyler, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just saying that I think we mentioned multiple times how Demonaz is a very proficient guitar player, and I think that's at least part of the explanation. Darkthrone and Burzum, much to their credit, did a lot with very simple elements, but I also think that was their downfall in that the more simple style of music was easily imitatable. Whereas Demonaz, his proficiency is difficult to imitate. I've heard people talk about trying to play Blizzard Beasts and feeling like they were going to break their wrist. Um, so I think that's maybe at least part of the explanation why is Immortal is difficult to imitate. It's difficult to play at that level of playing.
Mm.
Right, but so many musicians nowadays are so technically proficient that they're able, like, you even look at like deathcore and all that. All those guys are technically proficient. They just don't write good music. It's like all percussion and rhythm for them. But when it comes to technical proficiency, the musicians are out there. It's just they're not drawn to Immortal as they are with other bands, and it's kind of a shame because there is a lot of great things going on in the early Immortal that could be taken to the extreme. That haven't yet. So there's that aspect. Granted, I'm not even that proficient on guitar. I just started playing again, and I cannot do a Demon Us. But that's why I'm probably going to lean into keyboards more than guitar riffs, honestly. But I'll be able to make it interesting if you want to stick with me for that. I have a funny project forming. But Shelly, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think we said it all with those final points. Those first four albums, again, like they are absolutely canonized, and I know that a lot of people love them, but I think opinion is more divided than a lot of people understand. But I would say they are very, very experimental, and I think it's worth listening to them with that ear in mind and just unpacking them again, brief as they are, because they are oddities, as we've already said, within even quite an odd scene in terms of Norwegian black metal. So, um, even if you're very familiar with them, go back, listen to them again, because you will find something new in them.
All right, Tyler.
I think that, in summary, uh, if you believe in tragedies, you should listen to Immortal because their music is very tragic and dark and provides a wonderful sort of mental world to get lost in. And to make another corny Immortal reference, those first four Immortal albums are definitely the kind of albums that will withstand the fall of time. They're albums that you can listen to again and again over many years and still enjoy them and find something about them that teaches you something, something new that can spark your interest. So if you're listening to this and you haven't checked out Immortal yet, I don't know why you're listening to this and haven't checked out Immortal, but please listen to the first four Immortal albums.
Only if you can withstand pure holocaust of production values. Like, if you want pretty crisp production, do not listen to Immortal. Like, if you want to listen to the actual music and all that, and you don't really care about production, yeah, Immortal is where it's at. There's a lot of meat and potatoes there, a lot of great developments and contrasts, and everything that makes profound music is present there in the early Immortal. Jaime, what are your final thoughts?
They definitely broke the mold. Immortal at the time, for the first four albums, considering the time and the audio technology available, they did the best with what they had. They definitely were pioneers of the black metal, second wave of black metal. Definitely laid a foundation with those first four albums. I would even go as far as saying, if you even listen to their early material, their demo and their self-titled EP, that gives you a little bit more context of how much they've changed from when they started out. Godfathers of black metal, sure, absolutely. Tragic story, as Tyler had said, absolutely as well. You can't have a great story with some kind of tragedy in it. But overall, if you're new to black metal and want to check out what some of the second wave of black metal roots were, definitely listen to those first four Immortal albums. I'm curious to see what everybody's thoughts here are on artificial intelligence, AI. It's becoming a big thing at a certain point. I'm sure AI is going to develop music, if, for example, for bands that no longer have a member, like let's say, you throw in AI and you want to say, hey, I want to hear what Cannibal Corpse would sound like musically now, but with Barnes's vocals, and, it cranks out something. So I don't know if that's going to be the next evolutionary step of music. I hope not, because I'm not really a fan of artificial intelligence, but it seems that things are more and more going towards that route.
We'll see. Well, the thing about artificial intelligence is that it has reference tables to draw everything, meaning that something has to already be established for it to draw from. It's not capable of creativity. Um, it could do like a fusion. It's like give me a funk band that has like you know Beethoven and fucking Darkthrone and mixed in a blender. It could churn out something with some approximation of that, but it cannot churn out something that is genuinely new expression or anything like that. So AI has its limitations. So, but it could become a novelty. It could destroy the record industry because a lot of people just listen to music as backgrounds, atmosphere and all that, rather than focusing on the content. And AI may provide that need for them, but when it comes to people who are connoisseurs of a specific type of music, AI will never replace a human. So because the human has creativity, has let's birth forth innovation and all that. AI just references tables. Like I have a table of parameters that I have to operate in. I can pull this and that from my table, and I can juxtapose that into a sonic wallpaper for you. I think it'll be wallpaper, but that's my personal opinion. And nothing beats the real deal as a human being, and being proficient at their instrument, taking the time to learn it, and being good at it. And having something to express too. That's the main thing. Something to express. If you don't have something to express, you might as well be AI because you're not going to have any genuine, like, real things to convey to the world. So, I want to thank you all for joining for this Immortal discussion. Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion Magazine. We got Tyler, always the wonderful metal nerd. He may delve into things a little bit deeper, when talking about the more raw aspects of early extreme metal. Tyler listens to Morbid Visions every fucking week, and I have no idea how he does it, but that is something that is quite wonderful about Tyler, and he's probably the only human being who does that. And we also have the Metal Jaime, a good friend of mine, the guy who knows for a fact that I do not hate women, that I've had hundreds of thousands of girlfriends and lots of boobies in my face over time. So lots of great experiences, with the Metal Jaime being a good friend of mine, pounding beers and all of that. So no homo there. Not saying that if you're homo, it's not bad or anything, but I am a heterosexual
Have we
and
finished the
I
episode
have
yet?
delved into heterosexual activity.
I love women. I
But
love
thank you
titties.
all, gentlemen. All right. So, any last words, anyone? Or just say goodbye?